Welcome to You, Me, Empathy. Thank you for listening. We would like to remind you that this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Known as just a silly boy with a feely heart. Please consider supporting the show. Check us out on Patreon or simply leave a review on iTunes. Here's your host and creator of the show, Known Wells.
Hello, and welcome to episode 20 of You, Me, Empathy. Today on the show, I chat with my friend, lexicographer, language nerd, and author Kory Stamper. We explore the language of mental health. So how do we talk about language, the words we use to describe mental health and mental illness? Kory shares some etymologies of certain words like crazy and nuts. And we explore the idea that audience and intent matters when it comes to the language we use. And so it's a good one. I hope you appreciate it. Before we get to the episode, I just wanted to give a shout out to two new Patreon subscribers for You, Me, Empathy, Brittany Grant and Carol Paulson. Thanks so much, you guys. Your support means the world to me. This show is independently created. It's a lot of work, and any little support is so appreciated. So thank you so much. You guys rock. I love you. And you too, listeners, can support You, Me, Empathy on Patreon if you want at patreon.com/YouMeEmpathy. It's a way to support the show on an ongoing basis for as little as $1 a month. That's 25 cents an episode. So check it out, patreon.com/YouMeEmpathy. And I guess to you, the last thing I'll say is enjoy this episode 20, with my guest, Kory Stamper, on the language of mental health.
La 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 la. You, me, empathy. Yeah. La la la.
Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a podcast about exploring the struggles we face in our day-to-day lives as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our neuroses, our mental illnesses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being human. You, Me, Empathy is a safe place, a conversation between friends, a place to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I'm excited to nerd out on the topic of the language of mental health with destroyer of online trolls, passionate purveyor of curse words, and lexicographer and best-selling author, Kory Stamper. Hello, Kory.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for being here, friend.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Of course, yeah. The listener should know that I've known Kory for a few years now, just online, and she was a very generous guest for my previous show, Joy Sandwich. You were a guest a couple of times, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, before we get into you and your story, Kory, and talking about the language of mental health, I always kick off the show with an emotional check-in. So this is just checking in to see how our week was. How was your week?
My week was emotionally very frenetic, but I ended the week feeling very calm, centered, and actually with, a fair amount of joy moving forward. So that was my week.
That's exciting. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
How was your week?
Yeah. Oh, thanks for asking. My week was pretty good. The listeners know that I've been sick, and so I struggle with being sick, as we all do. But there's a level of struggle where I want to, like, I'm forced to be inside, which mentally is hard for me because I want to be outside and I want to be romping like a boy, and like a boy. I don't know what that means, but I just want to be outside and in fresh air and running and sort of romping around because that's my comfort zone and that's my therapy. But being sick takes away from that, which is hard for me. So I've been battling with that a little bit, and then yesterday I got my first. I was prescribed a what's called a medical food, and
Ooh.
the prescription is Deplin. Have you ever heard of
Okay.
Deplin?
I have not.
Yeah, I hadn't either, but my psychiatrist recently prescribed me this. It's a supplement essentially. It's a folic acid supplement, and because I did some blood testing recently, and what was shown was that I had, I think, 2 copies of this gene mutation, which I think is fairly common, but it's what it means is like my body wasn't producing a certain methylfolate, which is like a B, vitamin B sort of. The Deplin is essentially a vitamin B supplement.
Okay.
And so I'm, I guess, excited to try it out and see how it affects me, but also nervous at the same time,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
That
we'll
makes
see.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see. But that's been my week, full of mixed emotions, and I'm glad to be feeling a little bit better at the in the weekend here.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
thanks. Okay.
Yeah.
Kory Stamper, my friend. So we're going to be talking about the language of mental health today, and that makes sense for you because you are not only are you a best-selling author of the amazing memoir / word nerd heaven book Word by Word, which I read and love, but you also are a lexicographer.
I am.
And so that makes sense to talk about the language of mental health. But before we get into that specific thing, I want to get to know a little bit about your mental health journey a little bit. You had mentioned to me recently that you have depression. Is this true? Is this accurate?
Yeah. I technically, my diagnosis is dysthymia, which is, I think, kind of an outdated diagnosis at this point. But in terms of, you don't hear people talk about it much. But so I basically have constant low-grade depression, which under certain circumstances can be exacerbated into major depressive episodes. So that's where I am. And yeah, and I've dysthymia is something that people have pretty much their whole life. When I was diagnosed with it, it was quite a while ago, 15, 20 years ago now. It just made sense. It was like, oh, oh, yes, okay. And knowing that has actually been a helpful thing for me in terms of managing my own mental health, but also being aware of how my mental health certainly affects the people I live with, but also giving them it gives them something to hold on to.
Yeah.
If, they can say, oh, I've noticed you've stopped doing XYZ. Like for instance, I knit. I love to knit. and they'll say, stop knitting. Historically, that's a sign that your mood is worsening. How are you doing?
Yeah.
So it's been, in that sense, it's a helpful thing. I think it's helpful when people have a name for things and they can kind of, we like things to be solid and tangible. And so that's been helpful. So that's also been helpful as I have had major depressive episodes, having people around me who understand that I'm not just sad, or I'm not just lazy, or I'm not just, whatever. These things that I think we attach to because we don't talk about mental illness, even though we're in an era now where mental health and mental illness in particular, we're discussing more and more and more, there's still such a heavy stigma to it.
Right.
And I think that even though there's more press into not just the language of it, but sort of the common, how commonplace it is for people to have anxiety, or for people to have depression, or for people to have, bipolar disorder, or whatever a particular diagnosis is. I think that there's still enough of a stigma that when people hear depression, they're like, oh, so you like sleep and eat all the time. It's like,
yep.
Actually, no, like my depression manifests as insomnia and anxiety. That's
Right.
how my depression manifests. It's different for everybody.
It is different for everyone. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think I'm glad you brought that up, because it's such a I talked about this on a previous episode with Eric Zimmer. We were talking about the difference between sadness and depression. And
yeah.
I think it makes sense that sadness would be sort of lumped into depression, because, I think that that speaks to not having the language or the words to describe what this thing called depression is, because it is such a big thing and so many people suffer from it. And then B, just like not being, I think it's, it's scary, right? It's scary to admit to yourself, or admit to your loved ones, or have your loved ones admit to themselves that someone in their life is going through that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, my experience of it has been that I think because it is, and this might actually be an interesting segue into the language that we use around mental health, but I think because we have certain symptoms or responses that we tag to certain diagnoses, and when someone has a diagnosis, like for me, like I said, my depression mostly manifests in insomnia and anxiety. I'm not visibly sad. I'm not visibly upset most of the time. And so because of that, that sometimes can make a diagnosis difficult. Sometimes people are diagnosed with anxiety when it's actually depression. Sometimes depression and anxiety go back and forth. But I think it also ends up, it's hard for people because it is different. Everyone experiences mental health in a different way. There's such a range of symptoms for things like anxiety and for things like depression. And I think at the core, what happens is that people are just scared. I know that in my own family, both my family of origin and the family I have now, there's sort of a wariness when we talk about, we don't like to say the word depression, because if you say, well, oh yes, my mom has depression, or I have depression, then in that person's mind, they're afraid that, people are going to think you're one step away from suicide, or people might think, I think that people just react in fear because it's not a visible issue all the time. And,
Right.
and there's not an understanding that symptoms change, the way that people experience mental health changes. And so, yeah, so I think that sometimes we just like to have things stay in a box. And I think that people, because it just helps people not be afraid. It helps people not worry, which is, I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm a worrier. I understand that.
Totally. I totally understand it. It makes sense that we want to categorize things, put them into boxes. This is kind of like a running theme on this show, like all the way back to episode 1 with Beth Ann Patrick. We talked about the stigma and wanting to sort of classify things and label them a certain way because we fear the unknown. We fear the mystery of what does depression mean? And then I think it just takes, would you say it just takes more understanding? And it seems like, your family, you've done a decent job in terms of relaying to them your symptoms, relaying to them your specific experience with depression. And in doing so, they can better react when you are going through your episodes.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think what is difficult about that, though, and I think this is something that anyone who is dealing with any type of mental health issue feels, is that sometimes it feels like the person who is experiencing whatever crisis at the moment is the one responsible for educating, which is part of why discussing mental health broadly, but also discussing the language that we use around mental health is so important, because I think, I'm very lucky in that I have people around me who love me, who are not afraid to press in and say, okay, like, why were you up at 3 a.m.? Okay, why are you not doing this? Are you, and I've had to learn to not be defensive or angry when people who love me say, are you okay?
Yeah.
Do we need to help you? And, because I think I certainly have a big issue with accepting help. And, I think lots of us do. But I also think that it takes time to, understand your own mental health and your own patterns. And it takes time to be able to communicate that clearly. And that's a hard thing to do, especially if you're at a point of crisis. But I think it's an important thing to try and be specific and to be sort of unflinching in some ways about how we talk about mental health, because the stigma gets perpetuated with the words that we use or the words that we choose not to use about mental health.
Yeah. And we'll get into that just in one moment. I just wanted to, what you said just there made me think about the period of my life where I was dealing with anorexia, and I had this sort of pull to simultaneously want people to understand, but also the sort of opposite pull and almost like not giving them the opportunity to understand. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like I almost like, I'm just like, I want them to understand because I want them to see me, right? But at the same time, I'm like already putting it's almost self-stigma where I'm already saying they're not going to understand. It's too big of a thing or whatever. And so what you said about being patient and understanding that there is sometimes going to be a reaction from the people around you, and you being patient with that, I think is an important part of that understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I know for myself, I have a friend who also has depression, and she and I go back and forth sometimes about, it's really difficult sometimes to explain to people what depression is. And her response is kind of like, if you don't have it, you just really don't know, because, the stigma and the stereotype we have of depression or of anxiety looks one way, but that's not how it looks. And sometimes it's really hard to explain, even though I deal with words, I even have a hard time sometimes trying to say, okay, look, like, it's not that I'm sad, it's that I don't feel anything. And what does that mean? Well, I don't know. I can't tell you. Or, it gets very, I think there's patience that you need to have, not just with the people around you that you're trying to explain things to, but even with yourself. And for me, it's a lot easier to have patience with other people and not have patience with myself.
Yeah. No, I know that. So how have you come to a sort of, general way that you describe depression to people in your life, or does it vary from person to person?
I think it really varies from person to person. And to be frank, it also varies depending on, where I am in terms of, am I maintaining? Am I heading into a major depressive episode? Am I coming out of a major depressive episode? And I think the language I use really changes depending on who I'm speaking to. When I was first diagnosed with dysthymia, it was as I was coming out of a major depressive episode, and I had young children and had no idea what to tell my kids. I had young kids who were concerned, as young kids are, but I thought, how do I explain to a 5-year-old what just happened? Like, how do I do that appropriately? I could sit down and just sort of emotionally barf all over this poor kid, but I'm not going to do that. So even in that, my kids' understanding of depression has changed pretty dramatically as they've gotten older. And I think has become more nuanced because honestly, they both have met other people with depression who don't have symptoms that match mine.
Right.
So I think a lot of what I have sort of come to is that it really depends on the relationship, and it depends on sort of, can we establish a shared vocabulary to discuss where I'm at right now and how this fits into broader things. And with my family of origin, that's also been an interesting thing too, because I was most terrified, honestly, of telling my parents, because they're hardworking Midwestern folk. They're bootstrappers. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Just get over it. Don't cry over it. Is that going to make it better? And
sure.
I was terrified to tell them, hey. So, and I eventually did, and their response really surprised me, because their response was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you've always been like that, right?" And kind of like, "Oh, okay." So now we had common ground.
Yeah.
So I could now say things, knowing my family of origin. If I was heading into a major depressive episode, or if I was really having a hard time, I could say, "Look, I'm really having a hard time, and I can't bootstrap myself out of this." And
right.
Whereas I would never say that to my husband, who doesn't use that language.
Right.
So,
right.
I think that, ultimately we're relational critters, whether we want to be or not. And so the language that I use for myself just depends on that relationship. I don't have a very easy way of sort of giving a blanket description of this is what depression is, because it also, it has changed for me over the years. How that manifests and the struggles that I have with it have changed a lot in, 20 years of dealing with it. So.
Yeah. Walk me through how, did you describe, or did you bring it up to your parents or your family of origin, as you say, pretty swiftly after your diagnosis, or did it take you some time?
It was pretty swift, because I think they, as I said, I was really diagnosed as I was coming out of a major depressive episode. So I had sort of some crisis intervention that was that was really, I mean, it was appropriate to where I was at, and it was good, but it was very quick. Things move very quickly when you're in crisis, and so my parents had seen, though they were not local to me, they talked and they saw sort of this slide, and so I told them relatively soon afterwards, but really not until I had a name and not until I had a good treatment plan in place, because I knew my parents and I knew that they would worry. So I wanted to be able to say, this is what this is what I've been diagnosed with. This is how we're treating it. This is where I'm going moving forward. So yeah, it was interesting. And I think even their understanding of what mental health looks like has changed over the years as I've been sort of more not forthright in sort of talking about particular struggles, but just naming it over and over and over again. Like,
Okay.
well, we're heading into a seasonal change. That tends to be a trigger point for me. So, going to talk to my therapist and my psychiatrist, and we'll see if I need to, change medication, go back on medication, wean off medication, whatever. So even just as I'm sort of very blah about it, I think they've sort of, they've come to understand that this is not something that is a bootstrap issue, or this is not something that is just you're crying over nothing. And that's even changed the way that they perceive, I think, their own mental health, the mental health of their parents, right? This is what we do when we get new information. We start sort of shuffling all of our memories through it. And
Sure.
yeah. So it's been interesting. And I think that, yeah, I don't feel like I try to be as open as I can, but I also feel like this is a journey for me in terms of learning how to be appropriately, I guess, open, or how to, what level of, not level, but what kind of relationship do I have with a person such that I can talk with them about this? How do you talk to someone about this? I mean,
Right.
yeah, I just, our culture doesn't really give you a way to do that easily. So yeah.
We develop the tools as we sort of are experiencing the depression or or the mental illness of some kind. Yeah, it's so fascinating to me that we, as humans, develop different language patterns based on the context of the situation, or our audience, rather. Because I'm as you describe that, like, it makes sense that you would, okay, I'm going to tell my parents, but I am going to understand this, have a name for it, have a specific treatment plan in place, because my parents are bootstrap, Midwestern, practical type folks. That makes sense to me.
Right. Right.
And it makes sense, that I think that applies to, all the different sort of contexts and audiences that we interact with as we are trying to break down stigma and talk more openly about mental health.
Right. Yeah.
So, let's talk about some of the words that we use in and around mental health. The first one that comes to my mind, and I think is, I use myself sometimes, and can be damaging in some ways, is the word crazy.
Right. Yeah.
What is your experience with that word as, a lexicographer, or just as someone who is cognizant of mental health and depression?
So the word crazy is, I think it's actually, it's one of the hardest to tackle in terms of stigmatizing words, because it is so ubiquitous and it has gained so many other meanings apart from one of its original meanings. Its original meaning, this is interesting, was not necessarily to refer to someone who had a mental illness or someone who had some kind of erratic behavior. Its first uses were physical. It comes from the verb to craze, which means to crack. And its first uses were to refer to things like ships that were full of cracks or flaws or were not sound, pipes that were unusable, that were going to fall to pieces. So really, when it first came into English, it didn't have that stigma that we associate with it. It didn't refer to a mental state at all.
Huh.
That came a little bit later, and really was sort of it was used to refer to a person of unsound mind. That's sort of the euphemism that you get in a lot of older dictionaries.
Right.
And it's a play on cracked, right? So immediately from that point forward, you're like, oh, this is a problematic word.
Yeah.
The thing that is, crazy, the word is 500 years old at this point. So it's really, words change, language changes all the time. So in 500 years, it has gained a lot of different meanings. It is slang. It's slang for positive. Like, so in jazz slang, something that's crazy is something that's really good.
Mm-hmm.
It shows up in the phrase crazy like a fox, which means very cunning or shrewd. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And it's used even to, this is a good example. I am a big proponent of using person-first language and really trying to watch what you say. I don't do a good job of it always. I certainly have, I use stigmatizing language and when I do, and I realize it, I feel terrible. But I was on Twitter and someone posted a picture of a crazy quilt. So a crazy quilt, for those who don't know, is a quilt that is made up of sort of irregular and kind of unplanned pieces. It's not a cohesive pattern.
Okay.
And they're called crazy quilts because they are sort of haphazard, because it's not according to a pattern.
Sure.
Someone posted a picture of a crazy quilt and said, "This is my latest crazy quilt," and someone jumped in on Twitter and said, "Don't call it crazy, that's stigmatizing." And it's kind of like, well, okay, I appreciate the impulse to make someone aware, but that's actually what that is called. It's called a crazy quilt. Like, you wouldn't call it an erratic quilt or an unplanned quilt. So that's what's difficult about the word crazy, is that it has gained a lot of other meanings, some of which are really closely tied to the meaning that we give it to refer to someone who has poor mental health or is of quote unquote unsound mind. But it also means that we have to sort of parse it a little bit better, and that I think is hard.
Right.
My own personal view of crazy is, it's one thing to call a person crazy or to say that someone is crazy or doing crazy things. It's another thing to say that jazz solo was crazy, man, or like, this wind is crazy. That's...
She makes me crazy.
Right. Well, even in that, okay, what do you mean?
Well,
what do you mean? Right?
Yeah, no, what do I mean? Because it could be it could be negative, or it could be like, oh man, like, I am so in love with her, she makes me, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think crazy is something that is it's difficult. It's probably one of the most difficult words to deal with, because it's so ubiquitous that, I think there are a lot of people who want to get rid of what Iva Chung, who is an editor and a writer on Twitter.
Yeah, I know Iva.
I know. Yeah. Iva refers to it as saneism, right? This sort of, that's the complement to ableism or racism or sexism, saneism. So if you want to battle sanist language or language that is stigmatizing, crazy seems like the easiest one to do. But it's actually much more complicated. I think a good measure is you just don't call people crazy. Like, don't call people crazy. And if you're going to use the word crazy, or you're going to call something crazy, it's always good to stop and consider the listener. I think that's really what's hard for a lot of people about trying to change the language that they use. First, these things are so established that you're not going to get rid of them. They're not going to leave the language.
Right.
People are still going to use the word crazy. But what you can do is you can encourage people to stop talking momentarily and think, is the person that I'm speaking to going to be offended if I say, oh man, she's crazy?
Yeah.
Or even there's, and that's a hard thing to do, because maybe you don't know the person who is listening to you speak or is reading what you're writing. Maybe you don't know if you say something like, that solo was crazy. Do they know that term? Do they know that's good slang? Even if you use crazy as a modifier for good, like, oh, that was a crazy good food. Like, so I think in general, with words like crazy, don't call people crazy, and just think, like, is there another word that I could start putting myself in the habit of using here instead? Because this is really about habit. I don't think that people go around wanting to offend people most of the time, right?
No.
The average person doesn't want to be offensive.
Right.
And I think that, sort of the corollary to that is that no matter what you say, somebody is always going to be offended. And, 20 years of answering correspondence at the dictionary will tell me that people will take offense to almost anything you say. But your posture should be one of empathy. You should try to think very carefully about how you're saying things and how that's coming across. And again, I get it. It's really difficult to change language patterns. It is really hard. I try to be very aware of it, and I often fail. And that's not great, but I'm working towards it, right? So right. So crazy, I think, is the most difficult one. But one thing that you can remember is that it traces originally to the idea of something that's unsound or cracked. And nobody wants to be called unsound, right? No one wants that. So don't call people crazy. Think carefully if you're going to use crazy to refer to something that you could call, like, this wind is wild. This, that solo was awesome. Yeah, there's always other words that you can use. You just have to stop and think about them first.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Good tip. Have you seen the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend?
I have not seen it, but I know all about Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing show. The character that is, the crazy ex-girlfriend, she has a lot of, she's someone you can look up to, but she's also, I'm actually way behind in the season, and I heard there's some, she comes to a conclusion where she's suffering from some mental illness. I'm not clear on what that is, but that, even with that show, a very popular show, I can see people sort of being inspired by that character, who is very, who's a successful lawyer. It's still, so that even with that, like, a very popular show with that title can be challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
What about, let's see, what are some other words we can think about here? What about, let's see, nuts. What about nuts?
So there's a whole host of terms for everything from like diagnosable mental illness to erratic or unwanted behavior. We'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
That came into being in the 1800s, and just they all kind of sound the same, right? Like nuts, wacko, loony. That's another one. These words all came about around the same time, and they, I think, are sound the most jocular and often are the most stigmatizing.
Mm-hmm.
There are much more stigmatizing words to use, but I think that we sort of associate words like nuts and loony with like cartoons, right? Like this is what people call people in cartoons.
Right.
Nuts itself is another weird one, because originally it was used to refer to, it was kind of a positive thing. It was similar to fan, like someone who is obsessed with someone was a nut. Like this person is and positively obsessed with something. Like,
right.
They're a nut for this, or they are nuts for this. This person is nuts for football. So I don't know why nut in particular. I think possibly because my guess is that the slang nuts for, like someone who's enamored of or obsessed with something, possibly that comes from an earlier use of nuts that actually refers to like nuts, or like a forest that is full, forest full of trees that produce nuts, or that's a nutty forest, like nutty hedgerows, like so yeah, nuts originally was it was slang to mean fond of, infatuated with, enamored of, obsessed with, and really sort of it takes the idea of obsession, not so much fondness or infatuation, right? Like fan went the positive way. Fan is from fanatic.
Right.
And that goes positive, right? If you're a sports fan, that's a positive thing. If you're a sports nut, that's a little, there's a little bit
there's
of
a difference there.
There's a slight difference. So someone who's nuts in the mental illness, mental health way, it really focuses on that idea of obsession. And from obsession with something, the jump to derangement or someone who has a mental illness is a really, really easy one. And nuts is also hard because it's in slang use, it means, it still has that meaning of positive, or that it still has that positive connotation. Mm-hmm. I'm nuts for you, that kind of thing. The other thing about nuts, though, and this is also common with words like lunatic, deranged, loony, wacko, is that around the early 20th century, it took on a connotation not just of someone who has sort of broad mental illness, but it takes on this connotation of perversity too, which is, if anyone who has a mental illness or a mental disorder or struggles with any kind of behavioral or emotional disorder even, knows that the idea of perversity paired with mental health, that's a huge stigmatizing thing. So these words that sort of sound like, Bugs Bunny kinds of words do carry, most of them, that weird little connotation of perverse, nonsensical, ridiculous, contrary to good sense and reason, on top of the stigmatizing way of referring to mental illness. So,
right.
Now, my dad uses nuts all the time.
Okay.
That is one of his favorite ways to refer to people.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, he'll complain about someone and he'll finish by saying they're nuts.
I see.
And this is something that is, I think, is an interesting thing to consider. This is a little bit of a right-hand turn here, but if you're very interested in promoting inclusive language or promoting non-stigmatizing language, sometimes you have to choose your battles. So with my dad in particular, I let him use nuts. There is no way, my dad is 70. He is not going to stop using the word nuts at this point. I will tell him, oh, that's not a fair way to talk about them. Or I will say, oh, I'm sure they're not actually mentally ill, but I'm not going to take a hard line with him and say, you cannot refer to people as nuts anymore. I will, that's not a battle that I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight a battle with, don't use crazy, don't call people crazy. I will fight battles about, things like depression is not just me being lazy, or depression is not just because somebody is sad, and I think I just want to sort of frame things for people that there are lots of stigmatizing words, and sometimes you're not going to convince everybody that these words are all stigmatizing. Sometimes you need to sort of do a forest and trees evaluation and figure out what's the more important thing in this particular relationship. And for me, that's what it comes down to. Where am I at in my relationship with this person that I can say, because some people I might just say, just don't use that. I don't like that language. And other people I might say, okay, look, I'm someone with depression. So when you say, I'm depressed that the Patriots lost the Super Bowl, that means something different to me than when you say I'm sad that the Patriots lost the Super Bowl.
Right.
So, yeah. So that's kind of a right-hand turn away from nuts. But
it's
yeah,
a good turn.
Yeah.
I think the point you're bringing up is that I think that, to reiterate, is that we have a responsibility to speak about these things fairly and with compassion, and with also understanding our audience, and understanding that, in the case of your father, no amount of you saying, hey, Dad, calling people nuts may not be the best approach, is going to maybe change things. So understanding that, I think, is an important part of the conversation, and talking about these things is just the audience, and recognizing that, each audience is going to have a different perspective. Like when I think, for me specifically, when I think of the word nuts, I don't use that word often, but the context with which I associate that word is awe and wow, amazing, context, wow, this scientific, sort of exploration is nuts. That's how I sort of think of that word,
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's a fair way to look at it. But I guess pointing out that when we talk about these things, thinking about precision in our words, but also understanding that we have to have a little give and take as well when it comes to varying audiences and understandings.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I like to, one of the metrics, I guess, that I like to give people is basically people first language, right? Obviously things like, you're not going to talk about the mentally ill or a mentally ill person, even that, what does that say about that person? That's the only identifying thing about that person. That doesn't put the person first. It puts their struggle first.
Right.
And even in terms of things so when we get down to the nitty gritty of words like nuts or crazy, again, think people first. You're not going to say, you shouldn't say, oh my gosh, that guy is totes crazy. Okay, what is that communicating? What is that what is that saying about that guy who might just be having a bad day?
Yes.
Right? Like, or if you say that something is nuts, like, man, space is nuts, or space is crazy. Like, you're not tarring space with some kind of stigmatizing language. Like, I get that, but where's the conversation in that? And I think, so I talk a lot with friends who, or, I'm an editor too. And so when I edit things, this is what I do. I look for people first language. If we're going to be discussing mental health, then I'm going to make sure that you're not using words like, a mentally ill person, or a crazy person, or a deranged person, or a person who is nuts. Like, yeah, I think there's lots of different levels that you can approach inclusive language and non-sanist language in, like, and I think it's just sort of, as you become more aware, you sort of realize all these different levels of it.
Right. What I wanted to ask you and bring up is the recent horrifying news, with shootings, right? Most recently, Parkland. And one, there's been in the news this people bringing up the quote unquote mentally ill, and in terms of labeling the shooter and labeling these individuals as mentally ill. Trump, I think, at one point called the shooter mentally disturbed.
Right. Yeah.
How are you thinking about that, and that sort of the way that we describe that? Like, I feel like, for me, my perspective is that it's problematic. I think that, using those words has almost become a singular scapegoat, like it's almost like trying to describe it in a way that, or not describe it even, it's just like using a charged word to explain a behavior. And and that's not to discount the mental health aspect of it, because there's certainly that, but it's troubling to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is troubling. And in fact, I think, to be honest, I think most reporting style guides basically say, do not tie violent crimes to mental illness unless there is a diagnosis given and it is somehow important to the story. So the Department of Health and Human Services says that actually people who have a mental illness are 10 times more likely to be victims of crimes than to be perpetrators of crimes. And oftentimes, I think you're right, something that is completely inconceivable to us happens, and it doesn't make sense. A mass shooting does not make sense. That doesn't make sense. Right. And I think that we get in the habit of assuming that no person who is sane, quote unquote, would ever do that. And you're right. The idea of tying particularly, it seems to be very common with mass shootings that, it is now a trope that this person is disturbed, this person is mentally unwell. You get a whole bunch of different euphemisms for mental illness that go along with it. But, the reality is that you should not conflate mental illness with violence or criminal activity, because people who struggle or who have struggle with mental illness or who have a diagnosable mental illness are mostly not violent nor criminal. They are no more violent or criminal than the general population, because, this is what happens in the general population. So absolutely, I think it's if you yourself are talking about something like the shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School, or you're talking about something that seems inconceivable, use that word. I don't understand how someone could do this. It's inconceivable that someone would do this. Don't even you shouldn't bring up their mental health at all, because it's oftentimes wrong, A, and B, it's usually not relevant. I mean, there are other ways to talk about something horrifying than to tie it to a particular mental illness or mental disorder. So yeah, absolutely. It's a trope that I think we fall into, and we assume that people know that we mean it doesn't make sense. And it's aberrant. But then to say, well, that kid who shot up that school's got to be crazy. That's a different thing than saying it's inconceivable that someone would do that.
Yeah. And it's become this gross sort of, shift toward a different focus, rather than maybe we need to talk about guns, and access to guns and gun control,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. And though honestly, I see that kind of language even from people that I know would much rather focus on the availability of guns and gun control. That's what I mean when I say I think it's just a trope at this point, because we don't, we've now heard it enough, we've seen it enough. Now it's a phrase that's stuck in our head, and it just comes out without us thinking about it.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, you're right. I think that there are times definitely when it is deployed precisely to turn the discussion away from things like gun control or things like, police intervention or whatever. It definitely is. It can be weaponized in that way.
Yeah. When you were at the dictionary, what did you have conversations when you were talking about, okay, how are we going to describe mental illness or mental health in the dictionary? Did you have sort of long conversations around that?
I mean, those conversations happened. They're never actually verbal conversations. We don't speak to each other. But there are definitely conversations to mostly to do things like, okay, so how are we going to refer to what's the new standard, let's say, for talking about a mental illness, a diagnosable mental illness, or and things that don't have anything to do necessarily with mental illness, but are still sort of lumped into that kind of thing. Like, do we use intellectual disability? Do you use the word disability? Do you use even in terms of things like do you use mental illness? Do you use psychological disorder? Do you what's the most appropriate and correct language that can be used? And so that decision, that conversation does happen. I think that there's also a lot of conversation around the names of particular diagnoses, right? So, for instance, it used to be that bipolar disorder was called manic depression. That was its more common name.
Right.
And people still refer to it as manic depression. But that's not actually it's the name of the diagnosis anymore. The diagnosis is now bipolar disorder. So when you work at a dictionary company, things like that matter a lot, because that helps you determine, okay, so where does the actual definition go?
Right.
Because if you put the definition at manic depression, for instance, that implies that that's the most common use of that term, or the most clinically correct use of that. And you don't, you're always sort of trying to keep up with, how are we referring to personality disorders, for instance? Are they still personality disorders? What's, even, is it a disorder, right? The DSM called things like hysteria
Right.
a diagnosable disease up until the 60s. So I think that those conversations happen, but it's a lot of kind of, instead of trying to push beyond in some ways, it's much more sort of this large sweeping look at all sorts of language trends, and then specifically language trends that have to do with mental health, and say, all right, this is how we're going to use the word psychological disorder of mood, or we're not going to use mental illness in this type of definition. So yeah, I mean, those conversations do happen behind the scenes, and they do often tend to kind of go, all right. I mean, it's, in some ways, it's a very weirdly clinical decision to make, because
Right.
you're evaluating all of the evidence ahead of you, in front of you, and saying, okay, so, clearly we're going to refer to bipolar disorder as a psychological disorder of mood, because that's how the DSM refers to it.
Mhm.
Conversations that we do have that are more general actually do revolve around things like uses of crazy and insane,
Right.
these extended uses, like, and that's something that I think is an easier call to make. You don't, like, unless you are actually putting an example sentence at the word crazy, don't use crazy to refer to people in example sentences,
Right.
or,
Right.
so that kind of inclusive language discussion does happen. Around mental health, there's, it tends to be, because mental health issues and language tend to be handled mostly by our science editors, that tends to be sort of a much more sort of clinical decision.
That makes sense.
This is where the clinical language is. This is how we're going to present it.
Right. Right.
I mean, we also do offer more, as things move online, there's more space. And so you actually have more space then to get into some of the nuance of more general inclusive language, right? So you can say nuts is considered offensive by some people, or you can say, wacko, don't call a person wacko. And you can explain a little bit more about what stigmatizing language does.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways that's more helpful than deciding how are we going to define depression, or how are we going to define mania, or how are we going to define bipolar disorder, because those words, those words tend to be fairly, they're diagnoses. That tends to be a pretty cut and dried thing.
Right.
It's more subtle patterns. It's these words that we use that we don't think about. That's where the opportunity to really help educate about what stigmatizing language is lies for lexicographers. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up, I wanna talk about some ways. I mean, we've already covered quite a few of them, but some ways that we can be more inclusive in our language and just think about our language as we, presently talk about mental health, mental illness, but also understanding that the language we use, even when we're not, sort of actively describing mental health, can be effective as well, or affecting as well.
Yeah.
I'll start with one, just the understanding that language and the words we use can contribute to stigma around mental health. And, a large sort of emphasis of this show, You Me Empathy, is to be more open and be more conversational about mental health in the effort to normalize conversations around it. And
Right.
And so when we refer to things, and those things, when we're not, as to use your term, like people first, we we do damage in terms of understanding and expressing sort of a cultural or just defining a cultural or emboldening a cultural understanding of a thing when we use certain words. And so having that, I think, like for me, always having that at the back of my head when I'm describing things and just using language in general is a good foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also add that to get even a little bit more specific about issues around mental health, there are so these conversations that we have about stigmatizing language happen within particular contexts. And I think that can be really difficult sometimes if you see some, I mean, what I'm trying to say is sometimes the person that you don't follow on Twitter who says, here's my latest crazy quilt, maybe that is not an opportunity where you need to jump in and say, don't use crazy, right? Like conversations like this happen within relationship. And I think that sometimes you need to, part of being people first is thinking about people first. And that means that sometimes you're going to be in relational settings where it is completely appropriate for you to say, that is offensive. And other relational settings where you will have to say, oh, that's, tell me why you use that word. I think the idea is not so much to blast someone about language, but to help them see that their own patterns can be stigmatizing and difficult. I'll give a really good example.
Cool.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say great. Because I was just going to ask about like specific ways, like maybe some tips that you have in terms of bringing that up to someone. Like if someone's talking about something in a way that could be potentially damaging, how do you bring that up?
Yeah, so this is a great example. I was at work and I was having just a general conversation with a friend at work, and this friend did not know that I dealt with depression, and this friend also did not know that I was in the midst of dealing with a major depressive episode at that point. And I asked them to, again, we were friends, not just colleagues. I asked them to answer some email or proofread something. And they kind of were like, oh, fine. And they emailed me back and said, I'd rather shoot myself, but okay. And I, as a language person, I was like, oh, I see what they're saying. But so I waited. I didn't send them an email. I waited until I saw them. And I was like, hey, I pulled them aside and I was like, so you said this. You should know I deal with depression. I get what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I know you didn't intend to to bring suicide into a work thing, but just be aware. And I didn't say, don't say it. I didn't say you're a terrible person. I didn't say you're being, sanist. I just said, I just want you to be aware. And they were incredibly apologetic and said, I didn't even realize, not just I didn't realize what was going on with you, but I just didn't even realize. And I think that's the thing, is it's not so much that again, people don't mean to be, for the most part, offensive. I think they just don't realize. One thing that I have told both my kids, because I see them do this sometimes, is don't use the name of a diagnosable disorder when you're talking about how you're feeling about something. So don't say, I'm totally OCD about keeping my room clean, because you don't have OCD.
Right.
And what's interesting is one of my daughters gives me a little pushback, like, okay, but you say we should talk about mental health. And I'm like, yeah, but what are you saying about people? I mean, you're sort of also minimizing the struggles of a person who has OCD, that they, and you're also stereotyping. People with OCD must be really clean. Like, well, that's actually not true. Like, that's not the case. Or, oh man, I'm totally going to get PTSD from taking this test. Like, that's not what PTSD is. And, so I think that, again, so much of this is about relationship. And that's really because honestly, relationship is what removes stigma for people. When people realize, oh, you struggle with depression, or, oh, you have depression, or, oh, you have OCD, or, oh, you are neuroatypical, or whatever it is, I think that contextualizes things for people in a different way. And so conversations about the language we use regarding mental health happen within those relationships. They have to, because that gives a better context for people to say, oh, I should just never use the word crazy again. They have someone there who it ends up being a dialogue. And I think that for most people, that's much more helpful to feel like they're being listened to, they're being heard, that there's some kind of exchange happening, I think is much more important than just saying, hey, you're wrong on the internet.
And the statistics, pretty much tell us that we all have someone in our lives who, either has depression or anxiety or something, and that's an opportunity to, for those people, someone like myself who has depression and anxiety, to be open about it. And that gives people in your life an opportunity to talk about it and to think about it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I think it's, at the end of the day, it's a journey together. That's really what this is about. It's a journey about learning how to talk openly and sort of name stigma together, because that's the only way that stigma will end. It's not going to end by just one or two people saying this is stigmatizing. It needs to be something that we all move towards together.
Right. And, I think what helps me is that having the info that our understanding of mental illness is small. It's still, it's a very complex thing. And we talked at the top about like how that can sometimes lead to wanting to just put things in boxes, but be okay with that unknowing and understand that, it may take a little time to understand a thing and you may not completely get there, but if you learn a little bit as you go and be open to that, then you'll get better at it.
Yeah. It's a process.
It is a process. And I think, I love your term people first. I think remembering that we're all humans trying to get by on this pale blue dot, that's an important perspective to have when it comes to all this.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess let's start to wrap it up here and talk about some empathy heroes. These are people in our lives who are doing good work in terms of embracing empathy and compassion and kindness, and doesn't have to be someone personally, just anyone that's in the zeitgeist. I'll go first to give you an opportunity to think about it. My empathy hero this week is Emma Gonzalez.
Oh, she was going to be my empathy hero for
Oh
this
my
week.
gosh,
Dang
I'm so
it.
sorry.
No,
Well,
it's okay.
do you want to
She can
take
be
it?
Both our... No, we can share the empathy.
Okay,
hero
let's
this
share it.
week.
I'll just say
That's
a few
fine.
words. Emma Gonzalez, listeners, if you don't know, she was a student at I'm trying to blank on the school name.
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
Thank you, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. In Parkland, after the shooting, has since become a little bit of not a little bit, a big sort of proponent of standing up to, organizations like the NRA and demanding gun control, and sort of was the key, figure in establishing the march on March 24th. And she is just so young, and it's so inspiring to me to see someone like that be so out there and open about how this horror impacted her and her friends and family, and it's wonderful. And I think that's why she's my empathy hero.
Yeah. I also, the thing that I really was struck by was her scope. Part of why she's my empathy hero, I mean, all of what you just said, but part of why she's my empathy hero is because she is so forcefully moving forward to change things for everybody. And I think that requires a huge amount of empathy to see that to live through something so traumatic and to turn your focus outward requires just a strength of spirit and a real sense of compassion and empathy for anyone, not just who has experienced this, but might experience this, and not even on a large scale, but on an individual scale. And that she is, I just love that she is, just going out and doing it. And I know that she's probably getting tons and tons and tons of flack. And she's still doing it, in spite of dealing with her own trauma. I mean, This is hugely traumatic, but she's focusing on other people, which I think is so admirable and amazing. And when she runs for president, I'm totally voting for her. Emma, you have my vote, Emma.
You have my vote as well, Emma. I like that we both are saying that she listens to You Me Empathy.
Yeah, right. Like you do.
Yeah, like you do. I'm glad that we both called her out as the empathy hero this week, because she is amazing, and what a badass. I'm really in awe of her spirit.
Yeah.
Okay, Kory. Well, as we wrap up here, what's I know, you, as I mentioned at the top, you're a best-selling author of Word by Word. What does the future hold for you? What's exciting ahead? You have the paperback coming out, or maybe it has already been out. But what's exciting for you in the next few months?
Well, I am really excited about the next few months. I am hopefully by the time this airs, I will be doing some new things, some articles, possibly a column or two about words. I know. I'm going to team up with my friend and For Real's neighbor, Steve Kleinudler at the American Heritage Dictionary, and we're going to be doing a little project that will be for public consumption sometime in the next couple of months. And the other really exciting thing is I'm working on a second nonfiction book, which I'm just having a blast writing and researching for. It's about color and color perception and defining color. And so, a little bit of a departure from words, not too much, but a little bit.
Defining color, that's exciting and daunting.
Yes, it absolutely is. It is so daunting and exciting. So I'm excited about that. I got a couple of other writing irons in the fire. So yeah, I'm excited for the things ahead. I'm focusing mostly on writing right now, and I'm grateful that I get the opportunity to do it.
That's awesome, and I'm going to encourage the listener to go out and pick up a copy of Word by Word, Kory's first book, which is just, it's funny. It's you get a sense of you, Kory, in it, because it's part memoir, and then you learn a lot too. So it's a triumvirate of awesomeness.
I like that.
Well, where can listeners connect with you, Kory, if you want them to?
People can find me on Twitter at Kory Stamper. That's Kory with a K and a Y. And they can also find me on my blog, which is at korystamper.com. And I will be sort of touring parts of the country through April and May. And so those will also be posted on my blog if you want to actually meet me in person and make me sign a book or a body part or whatever.
Have people asked you to sign body parts?
Not yet, though a couple of people have sort of creepily joked about it in ways that have, yeah. The author life is a weird one. So no body, I have not signed body parts yet. I'm hoping to maintain that streak of not signing body parts. Yeah.
I'm hoping that for you as well. Well, yeah, I'm still going to pester you to try to get you out to LA at one point.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm trying to set that up for the end of April, beginning of May. So still waiting, but
awesome,
I'm hoping for it. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Well, and so listeners, go follow and read and connect with Kory. She's great, as you can tell. And you can connect with Yumi Empathy at yumiempathy.com and, all those places. And so, Kory, thank you so much for being on Yumi Empathy.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was great. Thank you.
Of course. And to you listeners, as always, I'm here, you're here. We're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.
La, la, la.